Now is Timothy Hagle. He is a political science professor at the University of Iowa. He's also the author of the book, Riding the Caucus Roller Coaster 2020, The Democrats' Race to Win the Iowa Caucuses. Let's talk about what Nathan was just talking about, some of the cases where we could immediately see an impact from Coney Barrett. Where do you see that?
Well, one of the things that we have to find out about is to what extent some of these cases are already underway. She really wouldn't be able to participate in them if they've already begun some of the procedural aspects of hearing cases. But if they've also been saving some cases, knowing that they were probably going to be very closely divided, and so they need to have a ninth vote, those she would be able to participate in. It's not clear which ones fall into one pile or one fall in another. Another thing to consider is that she is supposed to be an originalist, a textualist, so she doesn't expand the powers of the court or elsewhere. She basically reads whatever the legislation says, and what that does is it tends to push things back onto the legislative and executive branches, and of course that means they have to get something done.
That'll be interesting. We've seen in the past Republicans being able to really charge up the evangelical wing of the party during an election cycle because they're laser focused on a conservative high court. They want the court to overturn Roe versus Wade, which is a ruling that protects a pregnant woman's right to choose to have an abortion without government interference. Now that they have this conservative court, how likely is that to happen, do you think?
I don't think it's likely at all. In fact, one of the things that I tell my students is what's more likely to happen is that the court, in a later case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, actually reorganized some of the rights that were involved and came up with the idea of what's called a substantial obstacle. And so there's where the court can tinker with this a little bit. So I doubt very much that they would actually overturn Roe versus Wade flat out, at least not in any time soon. But what they can do is perhaps give government more of an ability to tinker with abortion procedures.
How about Obamacare?
That one perhaps can go. Now, of course, the mandate's already been thrown out, but what the problem, of course, for in particular the Trump administration, or I suppose the Biden administration if he wins, is that they'll have to come up with something new to replace Obamacare if that in fact does fall.
You know, I mentioned the evangelicals. They've really gotten their wish. They've gotten 3 justices from President Trump. Does that make them still motivated to get out and vote in this election, or perhaps not?
Oh, very much so. And in fact, that was one of the things, one of the big reasons why Trump won in 2016, because you had that vacancy from Scalia's death. And as a result, the evangelicals are concerned about things, particularly religious rights, given some of the things that the court is having to deal with these days. Then, of course, you get people that are interested in the Second Amendment, gun rights, and so forth. And so then again in 2018, we had the Kavanaugh situation when Kennedy retired, and now again with Ginsburg's death. So in the last 3 election cycles, it's really put that on the fore. And there may have been some talk that evangelicals were getting fatigued with Trump to a certain extent with his style, but the fact that you have a vacancy put this back on the front burner. And so, yeah, they're energized again.
What do you make of the election so far? Because it's not election day anymore, it's election season. We already have more than 62 million votes cast. I think 139 million people voted in 2016. So that's a huge number. Do you think we'll see a record turnout? And what do you make of the voting so far?
Well, at least as far as the voting so far, that what we've seen is a drastic increase in, or dramatic, I suppose is a better word, increase in the number of early voting or absentee voting. And that's no surprise. People are trying to deal with the pandemic, trying to stay away from perhaps in-person voting if they're concerned about it for one reason or another, plus the fact that so many people, government agencies and others, are pushing the mail-in ballot approach to this. And so the fact that we've got more people that are doing early voting is no surprise. The question will be whether or not that just takes away from the number of people that would have in-person voted. In other words, do we actually have a higher turnout? Well, again, the Democrats are very energized. Republicans are very energized. The big question is always those independents, the people in the middle. Are they tired of the whole thing, or are they energized as well? And we really won't know until we start to see the turnout on election night.
Timothy Hagle joining us from Iowa, one of the states we'll be watching a little over a week from now on that Tuesday evening, because that'll be an important state as well. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
The outcome of the U.S. presidential race may affect the country's relationship with India, depending on who wins. Ravinder Bawa has a look at the possible outcomes.